Mahalo for being with us today, Aaron. You know, it's such a privilege to meet you. You wear so many hats as an artist. And
we all do. We all do.
Please tell us about the festival and your view also on the role that art plays in society.
Right. So thank you. The Festival of Pacific Arts and Culture, Hawaii is hosting for the first time in June of 2024, and lots of preparation happening right now. The festival itself has an incredible genealogy. It started in 1972. And the goal of it was to assure the nurturing and the maintenance of traditional cultural practice. Hawaii wasn't invited in 1972. We were seen as not South Pacific enough, and relations to America, whereas everyone else is really, primarily working as their own nation at the table. We got our first invite in 1976, and we've been a part of the festival ever since. It travels throughout the Pacific, Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, every 4 years, and really welcomes about 4,000 delegates from 28 countries across the Pacific coming together, sharing their own sort of individual cultural practices, but also then rekindling this sense of unity right across the ocean, in our Sea of Islands, really.
And connectivity.
Right, absolutely.
Not just genetically,
right,
but also from a perspective of Indigenous people looking at the world in a different way. Tell me a little bit more about.
Yeah, Epeliho Ofa is a Tongan Fijian scholar who wrote in the 90s about reframing the Pacific, because we had started to see ourselves as really distant from each other. And he challenged us to rethink about the connection of the Pacific region through the ocean, that the ocean was a highway and a byway rather than a separator. And I think what that did was reframing and relensing of how we see ourselves in the Pacific Islands. Native Hawaiians looking at Maori from Rapa Nui and New Zealand, looking at Vanuatu and Fiji and Guahan and the Marianas. And I think there is just this familial genealogical connection that the festival helps to really re-enliven and help us to realize that the connection, right? Us amongst each other.
You speak about artists coming together.
Right.
What about those of us who are not believing that we're artists in life?
Well, ultimately, I don't know that I agree that there are people who are not artists. Ultimately, we are all artists in particular ways. And, I certainly see my role as, I'm a classically trained pianist, a classically trained vocalist who came back to Hawaiian music not until graduate school, really, But I find that in this evolution of humanity, the kinds of things we really enjoy doing, right? If you enjoy doing what you're doing, you're not working. That is art. Doing the things that that your soul is drawn to. That is artistic work. The best science project, the most keen business contract. Those are artistic pieces that should be really elevated as such, because it takes a soul to engage with the manifestation of whatever thinking that leads to said manifestation, right? So we're all artists.
It's so beautifully said. And
sure,
the reality of life, especially for many of our young people, is they need to get a job, or they think they need to get a job.
Yeah.
How would one integrate, that the soul and the passion of living with their work?
I grew up in a household with my grandparents, my maternal grandparents, and grandma was always telling me, go work for the federal government. You go be a mailman, or go be a fireman, or and none of these things really resonated with me. Of course, she's telling me this before the advent of email. And so, even that world is so different, but I was so drawn to music, even as a very, very young child. I spent a few years of my youth living, on my father's family land in American Samoa. And at that time, you would go to church or have an evening service in your home, and the family would just pull these sounds out of the air. And these sounds would become these beautiful choruses of harmonies of 6 and 8 and 9 parts. The work for us really is assuring that our souls are involved in the things that we do, so that we are led to on the journey and on the path of life to the work that we're supposed to be doing in the contribution of this life to the universe.
And as your art
Yeah.
and as this place demonstrates, it's
Right.
constantly evolving and
Absolutely.
unfolding. Closing thought for our audience.
One of the most important things I think about this festival is that once we are exercising our ability to share and showcase our individuality in the world as delegations from Hawaii and Tahiti, etc. But the power of the festival really lies in two things. One, the ability of the host to host, that we remind ourselves as Pacific Islanders that we have this kuleana, this real responsibility to assure that we are consummate hosts to ourselves and to each other. And two, the bringing together of all these individual ideas into a unified worldview, really, as a Pacific region. And then looking at what the Pacific region then plays in the world.
And Hawaii will be home to that in 2024.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Aloha.
Aloha. Thank you for listening to my conversation with Aaron Salā, Director of the Festival of the Pacific Arts and Culture.